Well, Siva, I can see from my watch it's exactly, exactly 4 o'clock.
Right. So we will start the session, Ian.
Wonderful. I think we should.
Okay. Right. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for joining us this weekly seminars, the webinars which are coming from MIM. And we have launched these sessions for all our members, and this is also open to the public. And if you want to know more, please register on our website at www.mim.org.my. This is Shiva again, and I'm happy to moderate this session for you this afternoon together with Ian Hamilton from Genos International. And to all our Malaysians of the Buddhist faith, and here's wishing you a happy Vesak Day. And today's session is brought to you in collaboration with the Konrad Adnia Stiftung organization, and is also extended to members of ACCA who are our supporting partners. And if you're an ACCA member and if you're attending this session, you will be eligible for 1 CPD points. Okay, so I thought of just recapping the last session that we had with Ian, that was on managing yourself remotely. And one of those polls that we did, the question was, which one of those work from home challenges that is very significant to you? So we had about 433 attendees at that point. And from that, 2 of those stood out very glaringly. One is managing distractions at home. All right, more than 35% of the participants said that you have the biggest challenge is managing distractions, and the second one is about staying motivated. So with that in mind, now when we have this session with Ian on how to manage your teams remotely, I think that will be very useful and kind of mindful for you.
Yes.
So this afternoon, I think we have now close to around about 90 participants. And I'm also mindful that today is a public holiday, but I want to thank you for taking time to join us. And allow me to introduce Ian Hamilton. Ian, sorry, sometimes I keep referring to you as Ben. No, Ben is Ian's boss. Okay. Ian has a background in learning and development, having spent his career in learning specializations of the Royal Air Force UK. And he has and in a variety of commercial learning and human resource roles within Australia, and he has a wide variety of leadership roles, including a secondment to the Buckingham Palace and an appointment with NATO. Currently, Ian facilitates the Genos certification program and delivers development programs for Genos across their suite of assessment and development products. Ian is certainly an experienced consultant, facilitator, and program designer who has worked across a variety of industries, including defense, FMCG, hospitality, services, and smelting. Ian is also an experienced coach, speaker, and training designer. He is also accredited in the following psychometric instruments. One is Genos Emotional Intelligence, Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, and of course, MBTI, this Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Ian holds a master's degree in the field of training and education from the University of Bath. And I'd like to hand over this session to Ian. Ian, over to you.
Wonderful. God, I'm always embarrassed when my resume is read out. Anyway, wonderful. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon for this webinar on leading remote teams. As it is a public holiday in Malaysia, a big shout out for you prioritising an hour of your time to think about the challenge that we're all facing at the moment, not only working remotely, but for many of us leading a remote team, which adds an extra dimension. So as Siva has said, this is a webinar that has a slight overlap with some content that I've covered already with the series that Genos are partnering with the MIM on. The last webinar I ran was about working remotely. And of course, when you're working remotely and leading remotely, some of the challenges are similar, but maybe the focus is slightly different. Maybe it's more about coaching people to get as productive as they can and to stay focused and to deliver the best outcomes as possible. So during the course of this webinar, I'm going to really shift the focus to the leadership challenge of the current environment And there is also a small overlap between my content and the webinar that was delivered by my boss, Ben Palmer, when he talked about boosting and maintaining your psychological welfare. And so if you haven't seen those two webinars, there is another opportunity to listen to Ben, and I think that's next week. Siva, is that on the 14th, I believe?
Yes, on the 14th.
Yeah, wonderful. A great webinar to listen to, may well give you some ideas and some things to think about in terms of supporting the health and welfare of your teams as well. So let's get started with a small bit of housekeeping. You're on mute deliberately. That's because any noise gets magnified when there are a large number of people on a webinar. It can become distracting, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. In fact, quite the opposite. And so many of you are already communicating with us via the chat box, which is the best place to contribute ideas during the course of the webinar. When you go to the chat box, you've got a couple of options. You can communicate directly to Siva and myself, or to everybody. And I would encourage you to communicate to everyone. That way we get the best sharing of ideas. There is also a Q&A box. I would leave that for specific questions, and we will endeavour to answer those as well as we go throughout the webinar. I'll be facilitating the content, but it's very hard to talk and read the comments at the same time. So I'm going to do most of the talking, but I will be asking Siva fairly frequently during the course of the webinar, just to talk about some of the contributions that you as an audience are making through the chat box. A recording of this session will be made available after the event, and thank you very much for taking time to join us today. So let's have an overview then of what we're going to cover over the next 55 minutes. Well, firstly, I'm going to do some scene setting and just position the challenge that we face in leading a remote team. And because Genos as an organisation focuses on emotional intelligence, I will talk to a small degree about the challenge of understanding the way people might be feeling in a working from home environment, a remote working environment, and some of the things leaders can do to better understand and manage those emotions. So we're going to look at the neuroscience of leading a remote team, particularly in this environment that we find ourselves in that is so fast-paced and dynamic and ever-changing. And if Malaysia is anything like Australia, literally every day there's an update, a change to the way that we're operating. And I think so many of us are keeping our fingers crossed at the moment that we may well start to see some changes over the next few months. I'm going to ask you directly, what are your challenges? I think the best thing about these webinars is your input. So we'd love to hear from you. What size is your team? How geographically dispersed is your team? And what are the specific challenges that you're managing your team overcome? From there, we're going to look at some tools, tips and techniques to help you better manage your team. Now, in the space of the time I have available this afternoon, we can't give you an answer to all the problems. In fact, if anything, all we're really going to do is perhaps create some thinking around what I could be doing differently. And we would love to hear from you. So sharing your ideas is almost the most beneficial aspect of these webinars. Nearly 100 sets of ideas is immensely powerful. Let's please share those as we go through. We love seeing your comments, so keep typing away. It's almost hard to keep up sometimes, but we'll do our best. And finally, we might not be able to get to every comment, but that doesn't mean we haven't read them. And the comments won't be shown on the recording, but we will look at them afterwards. And if there are any specific great suggestions, we will incorporate those into any follow-up information about the webinar. Now, if you haven't heard me before, just very briefly, I'd like to say that I work for Genos International, an organisation that specialises in the assessment and development of behavioural-based emotional intelligence. We're an Australian-based organisation, but as you can see from the flags on the map, we're also a global organisation with distribution partners working across the globe. And we've also been very fortunate to be the recipient of 3 training industry awards in the US and a Brandon Hall Award for Excellence in Learning Development Programs. And if you'd like to know more about us, you can find us on the internet. But our core business as an organisation is emotional intelligence. And I think as leaders, it's really important to think about the challenge that you're facing at the moment in terms of how your team members may be feeling. Every one of us has challenges at the moment. And not only are they challenges related to work, but for many of us, there's another story. It's the story playing in the background, which will be our children, our immediate family, and our parents, and all of the challenges they're facing as well. And I think in these environments, particularly when we're working from home, the ongoing challenge of managing the dynamics of this environment is one that we really, really should be very acutely aware of. Now, one of the most well understood aspects of social science is the fact that when people feel pleasant emotions, for example, they're receiving positive feedback about the work they're doing, they're strongly engaged in their work and getting a lot of productive feelings from that. We know that that has a broaden and build effect on the way we feel and the way that we treat our work. When we feel relaxed and engaged, we generally think more creatively, we're generally more innovative, we generally communicate more effectively, and we do our best work. The other aspect to this, of course, is that when we feel unpleasant feelings, and of course, so many of us will be experiencing perhaps more of these at the moment than we normally do. And when I say unpleasant feelings, I mean feelings associated with concern, frustration, anxiety, worry. These can have a more of a narrowing and limiting on our ability to be at our best. And we know that when we feel these type of emotions, it can sometimes be difficult to be as innovative as we know we can be, to be as creative as we can be, and to communicate as effectively as we know we can. For example, if you take yourself back to a time recently where you were in a difficult conversation, maybe with a colleague, a client, or a family member, where unpleasant emotions were likely to be present, do you remember yourself in that conversation being clear thinking, creative, articulate? Or do you think in the moment of the conversation you could have performed better? And I think most of us, probably reflecting back on a conversation like that, could think of things we could have done differently to get a better outcome. If that applies to you, then this is this science in action, because we know that when we experience unpleasant emotions, we do find a temporary narrowing of our ability to be at our best. So why is this relevant for leading remote teams? Well, the way people feel significantly influences the quality of their decision making. So the type of decisions we make, the speed at which we make them, and the quality of our decision making is influenced by the way we feel. Our observable behavior, the things we do every day, is also influenced by the way we feel. And finally, our productivity. If you put together our decision making and our behavior, our outward productivity is also significantly influenced by these two things. So in this current environment that's characterized by rapid change, deep uncertainty and loss of control, we shouldn't be surprised that there are large feelings of uncertainty amongst the people we lead. Now that could be about, when will I be returning back to the office? Will my job remain the same? Will my clients change? And of course, this can lead us, because of the narrowing of our ability to think so clearly, to make quick assumptions. We might assume certain things that aren't necessarily based in fact. Equally, when we're feeling stressed, we might actually start to become more aggressive. You know, those sort of behaviors that are uncharacteristic that we might see in other people that won't normally appear, but may at the moment, because below the surface, there may be some stress or anxiety. Equally, when we feel anxious, we can become sometimes quite reactive. So we have an uneasy, anxious feeling about what's happening at the moment, and we may react really quickly to something, whereas normally we may take our time, discuss it, and be more expansive in our thinking. People who feel worried generally are more problem than solution focused. So we may well focus in on the problems around us rather than the solutions to solve them. And finally, and I think this one is very typical, if you think about world leaders at the moment, leaders who are perhaps fearful because of the way they've handled the current pandemic could very quickly decide to apportion blame, and without pointing any particular fingers or giving examples, I think many of us will have read in the news world leaders not performing so well at the moment. So what does this slide tell us? Well, what it's really saying is that leaders should be conscious that below the surface, there are a range of feelings that we may not be able to see, but may well be influencing the way that our team members are thinking and behaving, and therefore influencing their productivity. Conversely, we know that agile leadership, and that word is used very, very freely in leadership, but what I mean here is leaders who are really skilled at thinking about the leadership that's required in this current context are probably more likely to create purpose for their team members. What do I mean by that? Well, it could be as simple as setting really clear short-term goals. What do we need to achieve this week, next month? Giving people focus is a great way to help them engage with each other. And in fact, a good example would be these webinars that I've been running over the last couple of weeks for MIM and other clients. They give a focus to our work. They help us keep productivity high and minimize distractions. Equally, when team members feel valued, so leaders taking time to demonstrate the value they see in the work that we're doing, then people are more likely to care for others in the same way. So if I feel valued by my boss, Ben, I'm more likely to demonstrate that amongst my colleagues that I work with. Equally, when people feel informed, so when they know what's expected of them or they know what's around the corner, they're more likely to shift from problems to solutions. And finally, when we feel empowered, given responsibility, given projects to work on, given a freedom to be doing the things that we know that bring out the best in us, we're more likely to be innovative. Now, these are not necessarily fixed, but it is an example of the sort of things that emotional intelligence can deliver for the people that you work for. And of course, it's not about always experiencing productive emotions and not about experiencing unpleasant emotions, but it's about trying to tip the scales so that people are feeling more of these emotions and less of the unpleasant emotions. Now, I might just pause here because I can see out the corner of my eye quite a few comments coming through on the chat box. Siva, what
There's a question from Jonathan. He says that we team leaders can be empathic to our sales team members. How do we manage upwards pressure from the management to be making the best of sales team?
Upward pressure from management.
Yeah,
it's a great question. I think one of the things to do would be to give feedback to upward management about the way that you're choosing to manage your teams, the emotions that you are sensing they're experiencing, and maybe encourage them to role model some of the things that we know can bring out the best in others. So if upward management are showing value in people through their messaging, the way they communicate, maybe taking time to ring people individually, maybe the clarity in which they're setting goals, that could have a very big chain effect, for example. There's nothing like senior leaders role modeling the very behaviors we want in others. That's the first thought that comes to mind, but this is a great place for others to share their thoughts. So if anyone would like to respond to that comment through the chat box, please feel free to do so. That could be a great way of sharing your thoughts about how senior managers, if I've understood the question correctly, could set the right example in this environment.
And Yen, another thing is to to have that courage to have the conversation with the senior management.
Yes, absolutely.
Because that is good, it's one of the requirements from the leaders themselves.
Yeah.
You have to step up and speak for your team, and I'm
Yeah.
sure the management will listen.
Yes. So it could be, and this may be controversial, but it could be that senior leaders might need to accept that productivity might have to drop slightly whilst we find our feet in this new way of working. And that could be a very powerful message to send to people that, it's accepted that the challenge of being at home with children and family means that some work might need to be prioritized and some might be a lower priority. But these are all things I think are great conversations. Every organization that we work in is different. I know at Genos we've had these conversations. We're accepting that it's a very unusual working environment and things will change. Thank you.
And it's also important for us to realize that the management themselves would be under pressure. Absolutely. Because what is going to happen after the post-COVID,
yeah,
there'll be a lot of pressures in regards to productivity, performance, and everything else.
Absolutely, and I think it's about displaying appropriate levels of empathy to the senior leaders who may often get forgotten in this, who are also experiencing immense pressure. So these are great questions, but I think conceptually what I'm trying to offer you here is this idea that we're all experiencing emotions. We're all experiencing thousands of emotions, more so than ever, I would think, because all thoughts we have bring with them emotions. Are you as a leader, and this is a question you may want to ask yourself, creating enough pleasant emotions for people? Even small things can be infectious. So maybe you could, after this webinar, think about what are some things I could do that could create solutions or could create information for people that might help people shift to solutions. How can I value my people more than I am at the moment? What can I learn from others around me who might be doing this really well? How can I empower people a bit more? Giving people freedom to run with things and giving them the opportunity to do what they do best every day. So there's a positioning slide to get us going. But let's hear from you. What are your most significant challenges in leading a remote team? So let's get practical now. We've talked about the science of emotions, but what are you actually finding is keeping you busy week in, week out? And I'm going to launch a short poll in order to do this. Let me just pull up my poll now. So which of these challenges are you facing in leading a remote team? It's multiple choice, which means you can pick as many as you like. We would love to hear from you. So I'm going to launch that poll now. Feel free to vote. Siva, perhaps you could let me know when you can see that poll.
Sure, I can see that poll.
Great, okay, so feel free to vote. what are the challenges that you're facing? Now, I know this isn't the complete list, but it's trying to give you a feel for the broad range of things that leaders are juggling at the moment. So if it hasn't quite arrived on your screen yet, be patient, it will arrive. Sometimes it can be delayed due to bandwidth issues. Great, I can see some of you are voting already. That's wonderful. Fantastic. So I can see 25% of you have voted. You do have a minute or two if you want to cast a vote. The more votes, the better. And the beauty of polls like this is that this isn't information that we can just pull off the internet. This is very much about your experience in your region, Malaysia predominantly. What are you finding challenging at the moment? And of course, these could be conversations, as we said earlier, you could be having with your manager. So these are really powerful information coming through. So I can see we've got nearly 65% of you have voted. So I'll just give that another 30 seconds. If you want to cast a last vote, that's great. And as soon as those votes are complete, I'll share the results, and then I'll invite Siva to overlay some context from your region to this that we can then all discuss. Okay, wonderful. 75% of you have voted. So I'm just going to close that poll now. My apologies if you didn't quite get to vote. And I'm going to close that.
You need to share that.
And I'm going to share those results now.
Right. Okay, great.
Siva, if you could let me know when you can see those.
Yes, I can see that. Great.
Right. Okay. I think it would be appropriate for me to hand over to you. This is your region. You're probably going to understand this really well. So what are the challenges that you're seeing from our participants around managing a remote team? Can you see that poll there?
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. What are you noticing there as really standing out for you?
Maintaining team productivity seems to be almost close to about 50%.
Yeah, which is a theme that came through in our working from home webinar as well. How do you keep yourself motivated when you don't have colleagues around you? It's a very big challenge for all of us, whether you're a manager or a team contributor. Yeah, and I will come back to that one later in this webinar.
I will close the poll again.
Yeah, the poll is closed. These are the results now. So the other one I'm noticing is how to keep people motivated. So you've got a group of people who you might not be able to look in the eye every day. You might not be able to read their body language. How are you keeping them motivated? So this is a big challenge as well. How often should you check in? How much trust do you feel you need to give people? To a large degree, I think we should be giving a vast amount of trust at the moment. If people are motivated, they probably don't need us to check in as often as we think, but that's a very interesting thing, I think, for you to reflect on. Siva, are you noticing anything else there that's catching your attention?
Yeah, but I think the biggest struggle with many of them is managing team productivity, because especially for many Malaysians, many of them, the experience is the first time they are experiencing working from home. And for some of the leaders, how do they manage their team productivity? Because they're not seeing them physically in the office and seeing them doing some work, and it is very often in many leaders' mind that, hey, this guy may be taking a nap or something like that.
Absolutely. I did read a great quote somewhere that if you can't trust your team to work productively remotely, it probably means there's been some things that you haven't done well enough in your leadership, because if people are really engaged, they should be delivering for you well. But of course, it's something we need to think about. If I haven't heard from somebody from a couple of days, doesn't mean they're not working really hard. It's a really, really interesting area. It's sometimes a lot easier when we're working with people to make those observations about what we're seeing. So there's a real mixture here. I'm noticing getting things done is a challenge. Just keeping people motivated enough so they can start delivering things from their remote environment. And I think really significantly at the bottom, maintaining welfare and morale. Did you see that one too there, Siva?
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful.
My leadership styles.
Yes, and something which I'll talk about later, which I think is going to be a challenge for us all over the next few months. So I'm just going to stop sharing that poll now and just close those results. So what you may well have noticed about the things that I put into that poll, and I have to say that's not everything, it was just a snapshot. There were two distinct types of challenges. There were the what challenges. By that I mean, what physically do we need people to do to deliver operational outcomes? So it's the task that I'm looking at there. And of course, then very importantly is, and how am I going to assist people deliver that? So classically in leadership, we have these two challenges. What do I need my team to deliver? And how do I want to lead to help my team deliver that operational outcome? And I think as we head into this leading remotely environment, these are two very important concepts to keep in mind. What is it? And do I have clarity? And have I communicated that to people? And how am I going to go about maintaining morale, welfare, productivity, managing people's distractions and keeping them engaged? Two really distinctive, important parts of leadership. And so the first model that I wanted to introduce for you in this webinar today that might help with this is what we call the ladder of inference. And I'm sure many of you have seen this before. It's a very famous model. It's been around for 50 years. It was developed by a Harvard Business School academic called Chris Agaris, a Greek name, and I probably haven't pronounced it correctly. But I think he was very pioneering because in the 1970s, he came up with this idea that all of us are living in a world full of information. And so he called that the pool of data. So as you can see at the bottom of the ladder, we have this sense that we are living in a sea of information. Now, if you think about 50 years on from when this model was developed, we now have email, mobile communications, internet, more news, more information than we've ever had to manage before. And if you multiply that with the news that's being generated through the current pandemic, I think without doubt that everybody working remotely will be surrounded by a sea of information. Some of that will be coming from you, some of that will be coming from clients, some will be coming from other team members, and some of it will be external information. And so the brain has a really big challenge here because what it can't do is process everything. So it starts to make quick, rapid observations about what it will choose to select. And Chris Agaris called this the process of observing and selecting. And of course, that we know that our team members will be doing this every day, reading their inboxes, listening to their voicemails, and making quick, rapid judgments about which pieces of information to pay attention to. And the next step is where it gets really interesting, because he said that this is where we cannot help but add meaning to what we're observing. What do I mean by that? Well, we will almost certainly add to the information other pieces of information that we've understood previously that make connections with it. So if I got an email titled ABC and I've heard some information about ABC, I'm going to pull the two together. And so from a leadership perspective, it gets quite challenging because we know that people will rapidly make assumptions, potentially draw conclusions, and before we know it, often very, very quickly, people can form beliefs and take action and get to the top of this metaphorical ladder, and that can become very challenging for us then to deconstruct. Also, once people have formed a view about something, they then actively search for information, we all do, that substantiates that view, and we filter out things that contradict it. And so we're filtering in more information and filtering out the things that are unhelpful. And the ladder of inference is a concept I think at the moment leaders should be very, very aware of, because there's no doubt that we and people around us will be climbing these on a fairly regular basis, and they can be unhelpful. So Siva, I'd love to turn over to you at this point, and I'm going to ask the group the question: what ladders have you seen people climb in your organisation or team? Have you yourself been guilty of doing this, and what outcomes have you noticed as a result? So please type your comments into the chat box. Love to hear from you. The ladder of inference. What are you noticing in terms of leadership around this ladder? Any examples there coming through, Siva, that you'd like to share with us? Could be about when we might be returning to office-based work and the assumptions people might be making about how long they're working from home. This is a very common one in Australia at the moment.
Somebody says that I'm an OCD culture. I'm in an OCD culture and employee engagement, which is part of a shared services. There is a lot of work that impacts the whole organization, and the bosses want to deliver it right away, pronto.
Yeah.
And it's hard to push back on this because they are all really very important.
Yeah, great feedback, absolutely. And it may well be there that we have to step in and sort of add that check in there. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges for people at the moment. I'm reading there from Yane, in a crisis, only a short amount of time. Let me just move my chat box up so I can read the end of that comment. To go through the ladder of inference. Absolutely. Many of us will climb these ladders in seconds. And they can be really, really unhelpful because they often are based on an assumption that hasn't been well tested. So assumptions could be about the way we work, how long we might be working from home, what the future of our role or organization might look like. These can be very emotionally draining organizations if we start to get too problem focused. If the ladder's creating us to believe negative things might be happening, it can be very draining on our health and welfare. And of course, knowing the ladders are things that people climb do give leaders the opportunity to start thinking about, well, how might I engage people in conversations that might slow their thinking down? So Siva, just once more, I'll just see if there's any more examples coming through.
One from Ian, it says that, our assumptions are always might be clouded by unpleasant emotions.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, very much.
You tend to get a little upset, and I think the best thing here is to restrain yourself. And if you can, try to watch that emotions from a distance and then manage it.
Yeah, great comment from William coming through here. Problems will come when leaders use past experience and not open to new assumptions, which makes accepting new paradigms more challenging. Absolutely. At the assumptions phase, if we're not embracing new opportunities and ideas, we could well draw a conclusion that's very much about old ways of working rather than new ways of working. So it is just a model, but it's an exceptionally useful model for a leader to think about, because if we observe people climb ladders around us, there are very powerful ways in which we can get involved and start to ask great questions that can challenge people and get them to think about things differently. So how might people use the ladder of inference? Well, ways to use it. I think first of all, let's be open to the fact that we and other people are almost certainly going to climb ladders. It's a fact of life. We're probably climbing them every day. And the fact that we climb them could lead us to form views that haven't been well tested. So that's number one. Number two, exploring assumptions. I'll go back to William's comment there. There are a multitude of different assumptions that we can make about any event. And I think the opportunity to explore thinking with team members is a very powerful thing to do. So engaging people in a conversation about opportunities, different ways of working, different assumptions can helpfully create more productive emotions for people. And that could break old paradigms and open new ones. Another one is that we as leaders should be explaining our thinking and assumptions as often as possible to make our thinking absolutely clear to people so they understand the assumptions we've made and they can challenge us. And so I think, if we've climbed the ladder, let's be prepared to just talk to people about some of the things that have helped us reach the views and conclusions that we have. And I think it's incumbent upon us all to think about being a coach in this time. Let's coach people as often as we can. Opening up great conversations, helping people look at other possibilities could be a great way to use the ladder. And finally, wherever we can offer clarity and certainty, that will help prevent people climbing ladders too quickly as well. It's the lack of clarity and the lack of certainty that often causes people to race up these ladders so rapidly. So it's a very, very simple model, but it's a very powerful one if we keep front of mind and think about it as we're leading teams at the moment, particularly where there are so much information and so likelihood that people will be climbing ladders rapidly. Siva,
yep. That is also another good suggestion from Santa Kumar. He believes that it makes sense to have regular town halls to understand the assumptions that are out there and for the leaders to offer clarity. It's also good to ask the question, what clarity do you need?
Wonderful. Two sides to that. And what can I offer? And asking people what they need. Some people will like more than others. And that really brings me to my next part of this webinar, but I'll hold that for a moment. That's a wonderful suggestion. I think town halls, what a great concept. Leading remote teams probably means we'll need to communicate more and more often, and also think about how we communicate. So there may well be a requirement to communicate differently to different people within your team. Yeah, great. Anything else, Siva, you'd like to share?
There is another comment from KKG. He says that the reality is the chief or the CEO who is responsible for the bottom line is now faced with a severe drop in revenue, which spell potential losses. So the financial metrics of the business take precedence over the soft side of business. This happens especially for companies facing imminent closure. So what can be done to shift the paradigm for the chiefs? for the senior management?
Yeah, great question. And again, a very, very complex question to answer in the webinar, but I think certainly how people feel will be fundamental to delivering a financial outcome. You know, people who are feeling engaged, feeling empowered, feeling innovative, feeling creative are almost certainly going to deliver a better outcome than people perhaps who are feeling concerned and worried and fearful. I know that sounds simple, but there could be a range of things that could be done organisationally to try and help the workforce get really focused in on what are our core priorities in order to deliver the essential outcome at the moment. But again, as I've said in this webinar, posing these questions presents a wonderful opportunity for everyone to offer up some ideas and maybe relate their own situation to that too. So rather than take up time now, thank you for that observation. And yeah, please, let's keep those comments going as we go throughout the webinar.
And one more, there's a very good suggestion from Noah. He says, form belief in the team, and that's most important. You know, that's about trusting the team that they will deliver.
Yeah, yeah. This is really where all of our good work over many years comes to fruition. All of the work we've been doing on our leadership, on our relationships, this is where we've got to trust people. We've really got to try and empower them as best we can, because you physically can't observe people. If you are someone who's prone to micromanagement, you're really going to have to let that go. Give people the direction they need, and then let them be at their best, do their best work. Immensely challenging, but of course it does present huge leadership opportunities for us to flex into a slightly different style if that's necessary. So let me keep moving. The next part of the webinar is interesting because what I'd like to talk about here is knowing the people in your team. Now, we all know the people who are in our team, but how well do we know them? And understanding that the unique characteristics of our team members could be really, really helpful over these next few months when we are leading remotely. And when we think about personality and behavioural preference, we know that fundamentally, most instruments that measure our preferences, the things that are more fixed in us, the things that are type-based, look at two distinctly important areas. They look at the level of control that we desire in the workplace. And secondly, they look at the degree to which we feel it's important or we like to affiliate ourselves with others. So the need for control and the need for affiliation with people. These are fundamental needs that we all bring to the workplace in varying degrees. And what I would like to do next is give you the opportunity to think about just one person in your team, probably somebody who you know to be different to you, who has a different pace, who brings a different perspective to team meetings, somebody who perhaps you might have to manage a little bit more differently than other people in your team. This will be a really good opportunity to just reflect on what is the great diversity that I've got in my team. So I want you to picture that person. Take yourself back perhaps to a meeting that you were with them in recently, maybe a conversation you were having with them, or even a project that you partnered with them on, and picture that person in your mind for about 10 seconds. Really think deeply about this person who's quite different to you. Okay, now hopefully you've got a clear picture of this person in your mind. And what I would like you to do next is think about their need for control. So how much control would they ideally like in their work? Is this the sort of person who's a high need for control? You know, they like to run with ideas fast, they move quickly, they're maybe a little bit competitive, they like to achieve goals. There's a real sense that they want to get things done, and they want to get them done in a way that gives them as much control as possible. Now, imagine you've got 10 coins or 10 beads in your hand. And looking at that vertical axis, what I'd like you to do is place a marker against where you'd like to allocate those 10 points. Now, what you can't do is place them 10 and 0, and you can't place them 5 and 5, but you can use any other combination. So if this person was a person who you believe likes a lot of control in the workplace, likes the sense of managing things tightly, moving fast, you might give them a 9 or an 8, and so you put a marker on the 9 or the 8 above the horizontal axis on the need for control. And it correspondingly, because you've got 10 coins to allocate, you'd put a 1 or a 2 below the horizontal axis. If this person, for example, was a lower need for control person, you don't see them as so competitive, or you don't necessarily see them as somebody who necessarily drives as fast. That doesn't mean they're not productive, but that's just the style they bring to their work. So allocate those points. You can have 9 and 1, 8 and 2, 7 and 3, 6 and 4, or the other way around. And you will end up with 2 crosses on that vertical axis. Once you've done that, I want you to think about the degree to which you think this person wants to affiliate themselves with others, needs people around them. It's a little bit like extroversion, introversion, but it's a little bit deeper than that. Do you see this person as somebody who likes and wants to collaborate? So they would be a high need for affiliation. They like regular meetings. They like connecting with you and other people. They like taking people with them on the journey. They express themselves very freely and openly. Or is this person a lower need for affiliation person? They're more likely to, happy to work more independently, see the need for less meetings and less collaboration, and don't necessarily see benefit perhaps in meeting too often. Once again, now on this horizontal axis, you can place those 2 points. You can't go 10 and 0 and you can't go 5 and 5, but you can use everything else. So you can go 8 and 2 or 2 and 8, 9 and 1 or 1 and 9, 7 and 3 or 3 and 7. But once again, please place the markers on that horizontal axis. You're going to end up with 2 crosses. So what you'll end up with are points that you can then connect. And when you connect them, you're going to end up with a shapes that could be similar to mine, or it could look different. But essentially, you're going to see which is the likely preference of the person that I've just reflected on for a few minutes. And as you can see in my example, we have somebody who's expressing a high need for control and a lower need for affiliation. Okay. So I just let you join those dots up, create the boxes. And what we're really going to get focused in on next is the box that's got the biggest area, because this will give us clues as to how this person is likely to want to be led by you, particularly when they're working remotely from home and it's less easy to communicate with them on a day-to-day basis. So once you've identified your style, we've got the opportunity to look at the particular characteristics of each style. And here are the 4 characteristics. So wherever your biggest area box sits, you can now look at the words here and you can get a real sense of what are the things that this person is going to demonstrate in the performance of their work, and how insignificantly might I need to flex my leadership to try and create these emotions for these people. So what are we noticing here? So up in the top left corner, high need for control, low need for affiliation. So a real sense of urgency. They're going to enjoy a fast pace of direction from you, a real strong focus on task. Probably don't need a lot of meetings, but they want meetings, if they do hold them, to be really practical in nature, very focused around getting things done. You might need to work with them more rapidly, talk more quickly, set goals more rapidly, and check in with them on progress, because that's what they really enjoy. If we move over to the top right-hand side, though, we've got people with an equal need for control, but this time much more focused about taking people with them. So they're going to be more enthusiastic around others, a greater level of people orientation. They're going to be quite animated. They're probably going to want more of your time than the other people, than the high need, high control, low affiliation. They're probably going to want check-ins from you more regularly. They're going to express themselves probably more often and more openly with you as they go about their work. Then as we go to the bottom right, lower need for control, high need for affiliation. They're going to be a little bit more reserved, but they're going to want assurances from you that they're doing a good job. They're going to check in with you regularly. I'm going to want you to check in often. They're going to be calming. They're not going to move as fast, but they're going to play a very key supportive role, likely to want to be very agreeable because it's about building the relationship. And then finally, in the bottom left, we've got that style that's lower need for control, lower need for affiliation. Here, you're likely to see somebody who probably, again, won't want to meet as often as others, but will expect from you a level of accuracy and precision. They'll probably want you to step things through in a very methodical, detailed, well thought out way. And when they do meet with you, they'll expect that level of detail being offered. And so these are the 4 distinct styles. So I might just pause here again, just to bring Siva into the conversation, to see what people are saying about people in their teams who might be quite different to them, for example. That was the scenario we painted. What are you noticing about the preferences of this person that you've just sketched out? We'd love your comment. So Siva, what are you noticing coming through?
I have some earlier comments. Ian, would you want to take them?
Yes, please. That'd be great. Yes, why not? Yeah, that'd be good.
Right. So here's from Bobby. It says, when it comes to work from home for his organization, it's pretty new. Assumptions are made quite often, and that is employee was said not working because the person is not responsive.
Right.
because they're expecting sometimes, when you call, then they are expected to respond immediately.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when people don't respond, they make that assumption that they're not working.
Absolutely. Yeah. Certainly. I mean, if you ring somebody at the moment and they don't answer their phone and they don't call you back, that's a ladder you might climb really quickly and think, are they not working? Are they attending to something else? We don't know. We're making assumptions ourselves. It's this is the ladder in action. I think it's a fantastic observation. Yeah. Great.
Mhm.
What
And
else
then
have you
another
seen?
one is how can we really engage with team members and understand them as in their assumptions? And if there are persons who are quite unresponsive most of the time, it'll be more difficult in this situation, especially when working from home.
Mm. Great, a great opportunity, I think, to perhaps offer feedback, encourage more dialogue between parties, talk about the way that you think that working together could work over the next few weeks, a daily check-in, a progress check around work. I mean, there are limitless opportunities. But coming back to this model, of course, some people will want more check-ins than others. So some people may consider this a hindrance to their work if they are being monitored too closely. Who might that be? Well, that probably might be high need for control, low need for affiliation. They might sense that you checking in too regularly is not empowering them enough or is slowing them down. Whereas somebody with a higher need for affiliation and a lower need for control, this purple box I'm looking at, may well actively want your assurance that they're doing the right work, that it's being delivered at the right time. This has been really important to them. So we do have an opportunity, I think, to be more flexible, perhaps because people are not visible, and think about taking a very needs-based approach to the way that we lead. And so if I progress my slides.
Exactly what you mentioned, Ian, just now is understanding the great diversity in your team,
Yeah,
and how each one are connected differently. Would you want
absolutely.
to take two more questions?
Yes, please. I would love to.
Right. So how much can a leader share with his followers in terms of how he feels about everything that is going on? Can
Mm,
transparency be bad to a certain extent?
mm. Well, that's a really great question. And there has been a lot of research done on vulnerability is perhaps the word I would use. Transparent, vulnerable, to me means sharing openly and sharing broadly with people. Now, I think there's always judgments that need to be made about what is shared, because you wouldn't want to share perhaps bad financial news that could really create concern with people. But a lot of leadership research would say that leaders who are open to being vulnerable, and if you want to go and do some great research on this, Brene Brown's TED Talk and her work is just immensely useful. I think leaders who don't share are probably going to be less effective than leaders who are open to sharing perhaps some of their own personal feelings, and where possible, sharing information. It's a balance though, and clearly you don't want to overshare. There will be some styles that will like oversharing and others that won't. So it might be you share more with one person than another. But it's one of the great leadership challenges. But I think in this environment, asking people, am I leading you in the way that you would like? Is my style working for you? Might be a great sharing opportunity. It makes what we're doing here is we're not assuming that what we're doing is perfect. And I think that could be a very powerful thing to do with individually with any team member. So that'll be one suggestion, Siva. But again,
Go ahead.
yeah, sorry, Siva.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, feel free. People have to share ideas. How much should leaders be sharing right now? What should we be sharing? Who should we be sharing it with? These are almost person by person judgments that I think we might need to make.
And that's exactly what Santa Kumar just now mentioned, constantly asking the team what clarity you need, what more clarity you need from me. I think that is pretty good. One last question here. Leading remote team lately has been increased with more online meetings and calls. How can we manage this better?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think some of the content that I've got in the last 10 minutes, my webinar might help that. But undoubtedly, we are all attending more meetings. They're tiring, virtual meetings, because you have to listen very, very accurately to really understand the essence of what's being discussed. So I think you've got to understand, or you've got to manage what works best for me. If I come back to these 4 styles, what style are you? Have you thought about this from your own perspective? I'll share with you, I am in this style. Now, if I am being pushed really fast for results, that's going to create some interesting emotions for me because I'm more of a supportive, lower need for control person. So my boss, Ben, is aware of that. And we have some very interesting discussions because he's very much more a fast-paced person who acts with a very high degree of urgency around most things. So have a think about your own style and then think, to what degree is that reflective of how I'm currently communicating? And do I need to be a little bit more flexible around some of the people I work with? Maybe we're having too many meetings. Maybe there's not enough. Have I communicated to my manager the effect it's having on me? Some days I may have so many meetings, it's almost impossible to get work done. So this is the very fact that you've posed the question is fantastic because it demonstrates that you're thinking about managing your working day in a way that hopefully is going to be as productive as possible for you. Okay, so if we move on then, really what I'm suggesting here is thinking about the people in your team and managing them in a way that brings out the best in them. So as we've said already, people with a high need for control, low need for affiliation will benefit from you with a lot of urgency around what you need done. They love autonomy. They'll expect you to move fast on things. They don't want to see opportunities lost. And they will like little updates and progress in their work. Check-ins from you could be really, really helpful. Equally, someone with a high need for control, but also a high need for affiliation. They're coming back to that question we were just asked. They will expect meetings and they will get frustrated if we're not meeting. And they will want opportunities to collaborate. And they will want opportunities to express themselves. The question we could ask ourselves here with this type of person, are we creating enough of this for them to be at their best? High need for affiliation, low need for control. They will probably like a slightly slower pace. They will like regular feedback. They will love opportunities to play a supporting role for other people and value those close working relationships rather than big group situations, and probably will actively respond positively to your support, reassurance and guidance. And then finally, those lower need for control, lower need for affiliation probably will expect from you a real sense of accuracy. These are the people who really probably won't want to see a diary full of meetings because they'll see that as a distraction. They're likely to really thrive where they see logic, critical analysis. So if they think somebody's moving too fast without analysis, that could frustrate them and annoy them, and they will want evidence behind your analysis. Now, every style is equally valuable. There's no better or worse style, but what we will see in a team are different styles. And of course, really, agile leadership is about knowing the people in your team, trying to create, I'll go back to emotional intelligence, trying to create positive emotions for those people through my leadership behavior. And one of the ways that you could potentially do that is through needs-based work, creating work that brings out the best for people and identifying things you can do on a person-by-person basis to bring out those positive emotions for them. So once again, I might just pause again there. I can see some great comments coming through and I'm struggling to keep up while I facilitate. So I might bring in Siva again there to see if he's got anything he'd like to add there. You're on mute at the moment, Siva. Sorry. Yeah.
Thanks again.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah. And there is another good comment here that says that these are times that will require more investment of time in employees by having one-to-one conversations and to understand how they need to perform more effectively.
I think what an incredibly powerful comment. This environment does undoubtedly create opportunities for us to have more one-to-one conversations and explore the very things that we need to deliver, and perhaps your leadership style and check-ins on whether what you're doing is working. I think that's a very significant comment. Anything else, Siva, please?
There is one more comment. Work-life integration is more challenging while working from home in terms of increased communication needs and working beyond the standard working hours on demand. How can we manage and balance between work and personal life better?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, what I would say here is that we have run a webinar on that very subject, working from home. If you weren't able to join the live event, there is a recording, and I am going to briefly touch on some of those ideas. But of course, I've only got a few minutes left today, and I really am focusing on leaders as coaches. But I would say that, you know, recognizing what are the things that are distracting you is a really, really important thing to do. And then trying to manage around those or manage them as best you can. But I think that's a perfect opportunity really for me to move on, unless Siva, you'd like to make one more comment before I do so.
And there's one more. How do we manage upwards team leaders who often talk down on team members in their coaching?
Yeah, well, I think it's a wonderful feedback opportunity, you know, to be able to talk to leaders about how they might be impacting people. You know, if they're open and receptive to adapting their leadership style, that would be a very, very useful thing for them to do. I think, you know, everyone has a responsibility at the moment to give feedback in any direction, upwards to our teams, downwards to our colleagues, about the way we are finding the way that we're responding to each other. I think, you know, one of the great outcomes that could come from this pandemic is very open communication between people. But that would certainly be the obvious thing to me. Feedback. Maybe they're unaware that their style is not working for that group. So let me finally then move to leaders who are having to manage and support people working from home. Now, as I said a moment ago, in this webinar, I'm not intending to duplicate the content from my working from home webinar, but if you're interested in looking at that in more detail, I would actively encourage you to access the recording, and Siva and his team will be able to point you to that. But when we think about the challenge of working from home, what are the things that we know that make it difficult for people to do all the things we've been talking about today? Deliver operational outcomes, communicate effectively, and experience productive emotions. Well, one of the big ones we know is that when you work from home, it can become very difficult to separate work and life outside of work. And I think there was a comment, and I missed who that was from, to exactly that effect just a moment ago. When your laptop or your computer is in your home, work never really goes away. And for many people, the separation becomes very, very, very unclear. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Number two, the home working environment's full of distractions. Now, whether you're working on your own or whether you have a large number of people around you because they're also working from home, there are a myriad of distractions, and they can become very, very challenging. And let me talk about more of those in a moment. The big fourth one, staying motivated. When you haven't got colleagues around you, it sometimes can be difficult to keep motivated, keep doing the things that we know we need to do, mainly because there are distractions. And so one of the big challenges we know, particularly if we end up having to work from home for some time, will be how do we personally stay focused, stay present, and get our best work done over the course of a working day when there are many, many other things going on around us. And finally, and I think this was mentioned a moment ago as well, the challenge of communication. Communicating virtually, very tiring. Most people are reporting that their working weeks feel very long. Virtual meetings are hard when you can't quite hear people properly. Spending a lot of time on the phone is tiring as well. And so they were the big four challenges. These are research-based challenges. And again, if you go back to my webinar, you'll see where that research has come from. So that's what the research tells us. But what are you experiencing? So let me run a poll. So what I'd like to know is, what are the challenges that you're currently supporting your team overcome? So let me launch that poll. Which of these working from home challenges are you helping your staff manage? So that's the research, but is this true for you? So I've launched the poll. Let's see how many of you can get to vote. That would be really helpful. I can see we've got 10% already. Let's have a look at whether these are true for you. Again, this is research that is your region, Malaysian specific, point in time, contextual. What are you finding is most challenging around keeping your colleagues productive when working from home? Right, I can see over 50% of you voted already. I'll just leave that open for another minute, see if we can cast a few more votes. So useful for so many of you to be voting. I can see here we're up to 65%. So keep the votes coming in, please. This is really useful data that we can share amongst each other. What are the big things that you're coaching people to better manage? 75%. I'll just give that another 30 seconds. Just a final opportunity to vote if you want to. Okay, and I'm going to end the poll. Share the results. Okay, Siva, what are we noticing that the group are having to actively support their teams manage?
I think it's more than 63% of them say that staying connected with you, clients, and the team.
Absolutely. Yeah, what a huge challenge at the moment. One of the challenges I think I'm facing there, because I'm in a sort of a business development sales role, is how much is enough? Am I doing too much? Am I doing not enough? Should I pick up the phone? Should I send an email? Really big challenge, yeah. And certainly with you, again, what are the preferences? How much should I be communicating? It will be different with different people. Siva, back over to you.
Yeah, the second one is staying motivated.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In the first few weeks of this pandemic, I think people are highly motivated. If this goes on for months, we could find this could be a significant challenge. Not getting that nice break between work and home might be quite hard for people. I've just noticed a comment coming in saying different age range, different people of different ages may well have different challenges in the workplace.
Yes.
Maybe the younger generation are more distracted by social media than the older generation. Just an observation on my part. Siva, any other thoughts?
Yep. The other one is managing distractions. It is placed at number 3, about 40%, while in the previous session, managing distractions was their main issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So what are we seeing? Well, certainly all of them are significant, but a big one is communication, staying connected with you, clients and team. So let me overview some of the ideas we introduced in the webinar around working remotely. And as I've said a couple of times already, if this is of interest to you, get a hold of the recording and go through that, and you'll see more information on that and the workbook that goes with that recording too. Okay, so let me stop sharing those results. One of the opportunities that I presented in the working from home webinar was, when we think about unplugging, what we're really talking about is trying to create a boundary. And that boundary is the life that I have outside of work between the life that I have inside of work. Now, the boundary that we create is up to us what it looks like and how big it is. But it could be a boundary, for example, about when I'm available to take work-related calls. It might be in discussion with you that there's an agreement that after a certain time in the evening, the phone isn't appropriate and it will go to flight mode. Or there will be times in the day when I won't be checking email because I have other work to do, like planning, or maybe there's other commitments that I need to attend to because of the pandemic. The boundary could be internal. It could be about you communicating to your family the importance of them respecting your desk and the paperwork and your computer and other things, particularly if you're sharing that environment with other people. The boundary could be the boundary you personally establish between when you will and when you won't check out of work, check social media, when you can and cannot be distracted. So conceptually, boundaries are things that we need to consider placing in our immediate work environments that could help us effectively unplug. In my webinar, again, I spoke about the importance of putting in breaks, putting a boundary around your morning break, putting a boundary around your lunch break, so that you're able to recharge, maintain your own health and welfare, and be at your best every day. So many people talk about the importance of setting boundaries when it comes to unplugging. And as a leader, one of the great conversations that you could be having with your team is about, well, what boundaries do you need to set? And what boundaries do I need to understand that you need to operate around in order to be as productive as you need to be? The other big one we talked about was distractions. And of course, the home working environment is absolutely full of distractions. So we might find that supporting our team identify their distractions and coaching them to manage them is a really, really powerful thing that we can do. So what might be some great questions that we could be asking our team? Tell me about the things that are difficult when you work from home. What are you currently doing to manage them? And then let's listen to the answers and open up a coaching conversation to see if we can support people manage perhaps homeschooling children, looking after parents or other people that they're sharing a home with. Other factors include coaching your team to set boundaries. The concept in itself is a really powerful one, and it can be a small boundary, like turning your phone off for a couple of hours in the evening, or it could be a very big boundary about hours of work during a typical day. And I think if we start to open up these great conversations about managing boundaries or managing distractions, setting boundaries, making notes of what we've agreed and checking in with people on progress, again, is really, really important, and seeing if there's any more support that we may need to be able to offer. So 2 concepts already that very closely work together: boundaries and using them to manage distractions. And in my webinar, you'll see that we got people to talk about what are their distractions, and feel free to put these into the chat box, but there are hundreds. It can be road noise, it can be the noise of people we share a house with, it can be things as simple as our poor habits around focus and checking social media too often. The other one we talked about was personally staying motivated. And we know that there are a range of great things that we can do to bring out the best in ourselves every day. I think the big one here that we spoke about was establishing new routines. For many people, they have a wonderful opportunity now to build a new routine. And we all know that as humans, we love routine. Old routines have been totally disrupted. Many of us are no longer commuting to work, for example. So what are we going to do in that time? Many of us used to have routines that involve social connection with other people. What are we doing now to continue those connections? Maybe after work or during lunch breaks. So I think asking your team what are the new routines that they could share with us could be a great conversation, and helping people establish new routines could be really powerful too. And the phrase that I really like here is the best routine for any of us is the routine that you can stick to. And there's no doubt that what works for me may not necessarily work for Siva or Stella or other people. And it's about finding your own. And the only way we can do that is trial and error. Now, other things we can do is, as leaders, role model really good health and wellbeing based activities. And this is where Dr. Ben Palmer's webinar next week will talk in detail about these big 4 proactive resiliency techniques. And he in that webinar will talk about thinking-based strategies like research, mindfulness and breathing. He'll talk about relationship-based strategies, connecting with like-minded people, having communal networks, building relationships virtually, having a buddy we can check in with or a learning partner. He'll also talk about physiological strategies, getting your heart rate up, exercise, even 10 minutes a day is better than nothing. Whatever you do is better than nothing. Walking, cycling, home-based gym programs. And finally, he'll talk about environmental-based strategies, the things we do environmentally that make our workspace very, very conducive to us being at our best. So I've hopefully given you a taster here of why that webinar could be so helpful. But as a leader, think about what am I doing every day that's promoting good habits. So if I'm emailing people late at night, am I calling my team at hours when I think they should be with their family? It might be an opportunity to reflect and think about some better role modeling options. And finally, communication. We talk a lot in the webinar about communicating in a way that's based on need. So do I understand the needs of my people and how they would like me to communicate with them? Building an understanding of what works for each member of my team. Am I communicating enough or not enough? When I communicate, am I removing distractions? So for example, when I'm on a virtual meeting, am I switching my phone off? Am I turning email off? Am I role modeling absolute focus and presence with my people? It's very, very easy to judge when someone has lost focus. They're on the camera, their eyes might move, or they temporarily lose focus on the conversation itself. And I think there's a great opportunity for us all to be very mindful about bringing great presence to our conversations, making sure that the person we're speaking to has our undivided attention. So, other actions we can take. I think this comes back to something we said earlier, being intentionally vulnerable. There's no absolute one right formula. So asking people around us, is my leadership working for you at the moment? Could be one of the most powerful questions we ask in the course of the week. Accept that productivity might dip at an individual level. There will be good days and bad days. Let's be a little bit kind to us in our own productivity and to others, and maybe understand that things are not going to be the way they are for some time. And I think finally, the leader also is a great person for people to download to. I think that can be appropriate, just letting people air their concerns, giving them an opportunity to express how they're feeling is a very, very important leadership function at the moment. So Siva, finally, I'll just go back to you to see if there's any other comments coming through there that you'd like to share as we bring the webinar to a close.
Yes, I think you have practically we have covered everything, and this time we had asked, you have answered a lot of questions, and thank you so much. We have passed our time. We've gone
yeah, sorry, my apologies for that. So, yeah, in summary, unproductive emotions like concern and uncertainty will negatively impact individual well-being. So it's a fundamental aspect of social science. Yes, Siva, sorry.
Yeah, I'm glad that you stayed on to answer those questions. I think this is the one session where we had a lot of questions, and I think we were able to answer as much as possible. Thank you so much, Ian.
Yeah,
and I think in my personal opinion, there's a lot of anxieties, especially when working from home. Anxieties for the superior, the team leader, as well as the people below you. And I think the most important thing is, as a leader, you need to restrain and manage that emotions is very important. And staying constantly in touch with your people is very important. I think it's always about the communications. Be open and be honest and be truthful with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And so, feel free to sort of embrace the challenge and take a very people-centered approach to your leadership. So I'm over time. There's my summary for you. Please be agile in your leadership and consider the challenge that people will be facing working from home, and see what great conversations that you can have with your team members. As with every webinar, I think taking away 2 or 3 great ideas is important. So feel free to action plan immediately afterwards. I think any idea is a great idea. Have a think about how you might be able to bring that to your leadership. And finally, thank you very much for joining myself and Siva this afternoon. We really appreciate the time that you've given us. And feel free to continue with the chat. Any questions, and a recording of the webinar will be available. And thank you very much, Siva, for moderating with me this afternoon.
Thank you, Ian. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I want to thank all our members and those who have joined for this session. Thank you so much. You will get the webinar recordings. Will be sent over to you. And thank you for the great sharing again.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.